Jesus saw him through the eyes of mercy and chose him. Jesus saw him through the eyes of mercy and chose him. These are words from an ancient homily for the Feast of St. Matthew, but it provided the inspiration for Pope Francis's papal motto, which I only found out a few days ago. I did not know this. But his papal motto in English is something like, "Through the eyes of mercy, he chose him." It refers to Jesus' calling of St. Matthew, the tax collector, to come and follow, to be an apostle, to follow Christ. But I think it is fitting to hear it again today in the context of this gospel reading, the story of St. Thomas, doubting Thomas. It's a familiar story. After Jesus' death, being laid in the tomb, the disciples had locked themselves away in the upper room, behind a closed door. And Jesus appears to them, shows them the wounds in his hand and in his side, but Thomas is not there. And despite the disciples saying, "We have seen the Lord, he is risen," he simply cannot bring himself to believe. He wants to see the signs himself. He wants to see the wounds in Jesus' hands and in his side before he can believe. Pope Francis, in a homily 2 years ago on this day, the Feast of Divine Mercy, which the Church celebrates today, he said, "Thomas represents all of us. We too struggle at times like that disciple. How can we believe that Jesus is risen, that he accompanies us and is the Lord of our life without having seen him, without having touched him? How can one believe in this? Why does the Lord not give us a clearer sign of his presence and love, some sign that I can see better?" Here we too are like Thomas, with the same doubts. But we do not need to be ashamed of this, Francis said. By telling us the story of Thomas, in fact, the gospel tells us that the Lord is not looking for perfect Christians. The Lord is not looking for perfect Christians. So what is the Lord looking for? Well, I'd like to turn to actually my favorite part of this passage of Doubting Thomas. It's not Jesus' miraculous appearances, him walking through the walls, or even Thomas's great profession of faith, "My Lord and my God." No, it's a short line from verse 26, right after Thomas refuses to believe the other disciples. It's a simple line, but I think it carries a lot of weight for us. It says, "Now a week later, the disciples were again inside, and Thomas was with them." Thomas was with them. Thomas came back in the midst of his unbelief, in the midst of his doubts, and maybe more importantly, in the midst of the pain he must have been feeling, mourning the death of his friend Jesus, who he had loved. In the midst of his isolation, in the midst of his seclusion, and trying to deal with his pain alone, Thomas came back. Thomas was with them. And perhaps more importantly, maybe it was the disciples who brought him back. They ran to him, we heard, to announce the resurrection of the Lord. Maybe they brought him to be with them in the midst of his doubts, in the midst of his pain, in the midst of his struggle. Thomas was with them, and still he did not believe. But he was there with them, and they were with him. And that's when Christ appeared. That's when Christ made himself present to Thomas. That's when Christ, in the eyes of his great mercy, chose him once again, chose Thomas, whom he had chosen over and over in the midst of his ministry with him. Christ made himself known to Thomas in the midst of the community that Thomas had come back to, had revealed himself maybe because of the community of faith and love that had welcomed him back. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together, there I am in the midst of them. For this is what I think Christ is looking for. Not perfect Christians, not perfect people, not people who have it all figured out, I think he wants a church, a community of faith, which is his body here on earth. A community of faith where each of us, believers and unbelievers alike, can turn to when we are in pain, when we doubt, when we struggle, when we don't feel up to the task, when we mourn. A community of those whom we know and love and who will always welcome us back, who will love us with the eyes of mercy and choose us to be with them. For that is where Christ appears. Through the eyes of his great mercy, he chooses to be with us, with the church, through, in, and within each of us gathered, to be Christ to the world, to share his love and mercy with those around us. As I stand here in the midst of my first Mass, a Mass of great thanksgiving for me, I cannot help but marvel and be so grateful, filled with gratitude for all the people here who know me well, who love me well. Those of you who have brought me into the community of faith, brought me deeper into the love of Christ, who have revealed Christ to me despite my unbelief. Thank you. With the eyes of his great mercy, Christ chooses him. In his great mercy, Christ chose Matthew. He chose Thomas. He chose Pope Francis. With the eyes of his great mercy, Christ looks upon us and chooses each one of us with great love. Come, follow me. It is the Lord Jesus calling.